Stars above Velshara Roman 4 had always been quiet. The little moon sat at the edge of a neutral system, far from the wars and politics of the great empires. 45,000 humans lived there. They were miners, engineers, teachers, and families. They had built schools and hospitals. Children played in underground parks lit by artificial sunlight. It was not a military outpost. It was not a fortress. It was simply a place where ordinary people had made a home among the stars. Nobody expected the sky to go dark with warships. 300 vessels of the NIGMA Empire dropped out of hyperspace in a single wave. They filled the orbital view like a swarm of black metal insects. Each ship was covered in jagged armor plating, bristling with weapon arrays that glowed a sickly orange. The NIGMA built their warships to look terrifying on purpose. Fear was a weapon they had perfected over centuries of conquest. Warlord Keddy stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Crushing Maw, and watched the little moon below him with 6 narrow eyes. His scaled face twisted into something that might have been a smile. Keddy's was tall even for a NIGMA, 8 feet of armored muscle, his body, a strange blend of insectoid plates and reptilian skin. He had conquered 11 species personally. He had never lost a battle. He opened a galactic broadcast channel. His voice was deep and sharp, like stones grinding together. The Velshara system is now sovereign territory of the NIGMA Empire. All species present will submit to NIGMA authority immediately. Resistance will be punished. This is not a negotiation. The transmission went out across 1,000 relay stations. Merchants, diplomats, and military commanders across the galaxy heard it. Most shrugged. The NIGMA had done this before. They took what they wanted, and nobody stopped them because nobody wanted to pay the cost. But some listeners did not shrug. In the halls of the conquered of civilized species, the great diplomatic body that loosely governed galactic affairs, a few elder diplomats exchanged worried looks, not because of the NIGMA, because of who lived on that moon. Humans. Within hours, NIGMA ground forces landed on Velshara Roman 4. The colonists did not fight. They had no military weapons. They had mining equipment and construction tools. NIGMA soldiers moved through the colony streets in heavy armor, pushing people out of their homes, shouting orders in a language the humans did not understand. Children screamed. Parents held them close. The soldiers did not care. Keddy's ordered the humans gathered in the central mining complex. He called them labor assets. They would work the mines for the Empire now. Their old lives were over. 3 days later, a single ship appeared at the edge of the system. It was small compared to the NIGMA fleet, a sleek, silver diplomatic cruiser called the Open Hand. It carried no visible weapons. It moved slowly and calmly through the blockade, broadcasting its identification codes on an open channel. The NIGMA sensors scanned it 100 times. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a diplomatic vessel, nothing more. Keddy's allowed it to approach. He was curious. He wanted to see what the humans would do. Ambassador Yelena Vasquez stepped aboard the Crushing Maw with 2 unarmed aides. She was a small woman, dark-haired, somewhere in her 50s. She wore a simple gray suit with the emblem of the Terran Confederacy on her collar. She carried no weapons, no devices, nothing but a data pad and a calm expression that did not change even when NIGMA guards pointed their rifles at her chest. Keddy's received her in his war room, surrounded by his officers. He towered over her. He made sure of it, standing on a raised platform so that she had to look up at him. It was a dominance display, the kind the NIGMA used on every conquered species. Vasquez did not seem to notice. She looked up at him the way a person might look at a tall building, nodding it, not impressed by it. "Warlord Keddy's," she said. Her voice was steady. "I am Ambassador Yelena Vasquez of the Terran Confederacy. I am here to deliver a formal message." Keddy's leaned forward. "Speak, little creature." The Terran Confederacy formally requests the immediate and complete withdrawal of all NIGMA military forces from the Velshara system. Our citizens are to be released unharmed. All property seized from our colonists will be returned. You have 90 standard cycles to comply. She paused. The room was silent. This is your first warning, she said. We sincerely hope it will be your last. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Kedis made a sound, a rapid clicking from deep in his throat. It was laughter. His officers joined in, filling the war room with the sharp, ugly noise. A warning, Kedis said. You bring one little ship into the heart of my fleet and you warn me. He turned to his communications officer. Broadcast this. Send her words to every commander in the Empire. Let them hear what the humans consider strength. The recording went out across NIGMA space. Commanders and soldiers laughed at it in barracks and mess halls across 1,000 worlds. The tiny human woman, standing alone in front of the great warlord, making threats she could never keep. It became a joke, a piece of entertainment passed around for amusement. Vasquez watched Kedis laugh. She did not argue, she did not raise her voice. She simply nodded once, turned, and walked out of the war room. Her aides followed. No one stopped them. As the open hand pulled away from the NIGMA fleet and made its slow, unhurried journey out of the system, something else was happening in the background that nobody in the NIGMA fleet noticed. At 3 separate conquered observation stations, elder species diplomats were already filing emergency reports. The Velthani ambassador, an ancient creature who had served the conquered for 200 years, contacted his government with a single message. Begin evacuating all Velthani assets within 50 light-years of NIGMA territory. Immediately. The Dranaki ambassador, whose own species had once faced a human warning 50 years ago, locked himself in his quarters and refused to speak to anyone for a full day. When he finally emerged, his staff said he looked like he had aged a decade. A conquered intelligence analyst, a young Scythian female who had studied human military history as her specialty, pulled up an old file. It was mostly redacted, whole sections blacked out. The file was simply titled, The Silence of Reth. She read what little remained and her 4 hands began to shake. She found her supervisor in the corridor. Sir, she said, the NIGMA need to listen to that warning. Her supervisor, an old Metheran with tired eyes, looked at her. They will not. Then someone needs to make them understand what is coming. The old Metheran shook his head slowly. No one can make them understand. That is the entire problem. He paused and looked out a viewport at the distant stars. The humans told them exactly what to do. They always do. They are the most honest species in the galaxy, and no one ever believes them until it is far too late. Back on Velshara Roman 4, NIGMA soldiers marched the human colonists into the deep mines. The work was brutal. The air was thin. The food was poor. Within the first week, people began to die. Somewhere far away in the quiet halls of the Terran Confederacy, a clock began counting down. 90 cycles. The humans waited, patient and still, like deep water before a storm. 90 cycles passed slowly for the people in the mines. They passed even more slowly for those who were watching from across the galaxy. The conquered of civilized species held 3 emergency sessions during those 90 days. Each time, the elder diplomats argued about what to do. Some wanted to send a peacekeeping fleet. Others said it was not the conquered's business. A few, the ones who had been alive long enough to remember, said nothing at all. They just sat in their chairs with heavy faces and waited for the deadline to arrive. On Velshara Roman 4, 200 human colonists were dead. Some had collapsed in the mines from exhaustion. Others had been killed by NIGMA guards for moving too slowly or speaking out of turn. A 13-year-old girl named Seo-Yun Park had died of an infection that could have been treated with basic medicine. The NIGMA did not waste medicine on labor assets. The names of the dead traveled back to Earth through channels that the NIGMA did not know existed. Every name was recorded. Every face was saved. Every cause of death was documented with cold precision. When the 90th cycle ended, the Terran Confederacy moved. Admiral Cale Morrow received his orders aboard the battleship Requiem, flagship of the 5th Expeditionary Fleet. Morrow was 61 years old, tall, lean, and gray at the temples. He had spent 40 years in the Confederate Navy. He spoke softly and rarely smiled. His crew respected him not because he was loud or inspiring, but because he was exact. Every order he gave had a reason. Every plan he made had a backup, and a backup for the backup. The 5th Expeditionary Fleet was not large by galactic standards. 47 ships, cruisers, destroyers, a handful of frigates, and the Requiem itself. When the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Velshara system and took formation, the NIGMA sensor operators almost laughed. Warlord Kedis was informed immediately. He studied the human fleet on his tactical display and clicked his teeth in amusement. 47 ships against his 300. The humans were either very brave or very stupid. He chose to believe they were stupid. Morrow did not advance. He did not fire. He arranged his fleet in a perfect geometric formation at the system's edge and powered down all weapons. Then he opened a broadcast channel. His voice was calm and flat, the voice of a man reading facts from a page. This is Admiral Cale Morrow of the Terran Confederate Navy, addressing the NIGMA occupation force in the Velshara system. 200 of our people are dead under your authority. Their names are known to us, every single one. He paused, the silence stretched across the void. The Terran Confederacy does not ask again lightly. You will withdraw all military forces from Velshara within 30 standard cycles. You will release every surviving human colonist without condition. You will provide the names and ranks of every individual responsible for the deaths of our citizens. Failure to comply will result in the activation of the Terran doctrine of measured response. You will not receive this courtesy again. He closed the channel. Across the galaxy, intelligence analysts from dozens of species scrambled to understand what was happening. The phrase Terran doctrine of measured response appeared in old files that most governments had never bothered to read. A conquered research team pulled up everything they could find. There was not much. The most complete record was the Dranaki incident, which had happened 50 years earlier. The Dranaki, a proud warrior species, had seized a human trading post in a border dispute. Humanity had issued Warning 1. The Dranaki had ignored it. Humanity had issued Warning 2 and deployed a fleet. The Dranaki had taken one look at the human fleet, studied its formation, and surrendered within 6 hours. When asked later why they had given up so quickly, the Dranaki ambassador had said only, "We looked at their ships and realized they were not there to fight a war. They were there to finish one. There is a difference." The Dranaki had been wise. They were still a thriving civilization. But there was another record, older and far more disturbing. It was buried in the Conquered's deepest archives, classified at the highest level. Most of it was missing, not lost, but deliberately erased. The file was called The Silence of Reth. The Reth had been a powerful civilization that controlled over 200 star systems. They had gone to war with humanity during the early years of human expansion. The records showed that 3 warnings were issued. The Reth ignored all 3. What happened next was not in the file. The pages were blank. The data was gone. All that remained was a single note, written by a conquered archivist 300 years ago. The Reth civilization no longer exists. No further information is available. By order of the conquered High Council, no further information will be sought. The Scythian intelligence analyst who had been studying humanity for years found this file and brought it to the conquered Security Council. She stood before a room full of the most powerful diplomats in the galaxy and said, The NIGMA have received their second warning. If they receive a third, I believe we will be witnessing something that has not happened in 3 centuries. An elder council member asked, "What exactly happened to the Wraith?" The analyst looked at him. "Nobody knows, sir, and I think that is the point." Meanwhile, Overmind Sheathrek sat on his throne on the NIGMA homeworld and read Morrow's warning with all 6 eyes. Sheathrek was the supreme ruler of the NIGMA Empire, a creature of enormous intelligence and even greater pride. He had built his empire through conquest. He had crushed 38 species under his rule. He believed with every fiber of his being that the strong ruled and the weak obeyed. It was not cruelty to him. It was nature. It was truth. The idea that 47 human ships could threaten an empire of 1,200 star systems was not just laughable to him. It was offensive. He composed his response personally. He wanted the humans to hear every word from his own mouth. He stood before his imperial broadcast array, his armored body gleaming under harsh light, and spoke. "Admiral Morrow, humans of the Terran Confederacy, I have heard your words. I will give you my answer. The NIGMA Empire does not bow, not to you, not to anyone. Your people in our minds are our property now. Your tiny fleet is an insult. You speak of consequences, but you do not understand what that word means. I have broken civilizations older and stronger than yours. I have ground empires into dust beneath my feet." He leaned forward, his 6 eyes burning. "Come, little mammals. Bring your 47 ships. I will send 2,000. And when your fleet is scattered across the void and your worlds are burning, you will understand what the NIGMA truly are." He gave the order. 2,000 warships from across the Empire began converging on the Velshara system. It was the largest military mobilization in NIGMA history. Sheathrek wanted to make a statement that the entire galaxy would remember. Admiral Morrow received Sheathrak's broadcast aboard the Requiem. He listened to every word without expression. His bridge crew watched him carefully. Some of them were young, and they were afraid. 2,000 ships was a force that could crush the 5th Fleet in minutes. Morrow said nothing for a long time after the broadcast ended. He stood at the viewport and looked out at the distant stars. Then he turned to his communications officer. "Get me a secure channel to Confederate High Command. Authorization level Prometheus." The officer's hands trembled as she entered the codes. Every person on that bridge knew what the Prometheus contingency was. It was not a battle plan. It was not a defensive measure. It was something else entirely, something that existed in sealed files that even most admirals had never seen. The channel opened. Morrow looked into the camera with eyes that held no anger, no fear, and no doubt. He spoke one sentence. "They have chosen." The channel closed. Morrow turned to his crew. "Begin withdrawal from the Velshara system. All ships, full retreat, standard formation. We will not fire a single shot today." The 5th Fleet turned and left, quietly, calmly, without hurry. Across the galaxy, the elder species watched the human fleet withdraw and felt something that surprised them. They did not feel relief. They felt dread, because the humans were not running. They were clearing the field. They were making room for something that was coming, something that the NIGMA could not see and could not imagine. A Velthani elder, 900 years old, watched the human fleet disappear from his sensor display and spoke to his aide in a voice barely above a whisper. "I have lived a very long time. I have seen wars and empires and the death of stars, but I have never been more afraid than I am right now, because those humans are not retreating. They are getting ready." Warlord Ketty stood on the bridge of the crushing maw and watched the human fleet vanish from his sensors. One moment they were there, a neat formation of 47 ships at the edge of the system. The next moment, they were gone, jumped to hyperspace without firing a single shot. He turned to his officers and spread his armored arms wide. "They ran," he said. "The great Terran Confederacy sent their little fleet, made their little speech, and ran like prey animals. His officers clicked their teeth in approval. The sound echoed through the bridge like gravel pouring onto metal. It was the NIGMA sound of victory. Keddies opened a broadcast to the entire fleet. All units, the human fleet has retreated. Velshara is ours. The Terran Confederacy is weak, as we always knew they were. The message spread across the NIGMA empire like fire. Soldiers celebrated. Commanders boasted. On the homeworld, Overmind Sheathrek received the news and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had stared down a human admiral, and the human had blinked first. It confirmed everything Sheathrek believed about the universe. The strong always won. His 2,000-ship armada continued its journey toward Velshara. Not because it was needed anymore, but because Sheathrek wanted the galaxy to see the full might of his empire. He wanted every watching species to understand that challenging the NIGMA meant facing a force that could darken the sky of any world. For 8 days after the human retreat, nothing happened. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Conquered analysts reported no human military movement anywhere. Merchant ships continued their routes. Diplomatic channels remained open. It was as if the confrontation at Velshara had been a small disagreement, already forgotten. Some NIGMA officials began to relax. Perhaps the humans had accepted their loss. Perhaps they had decided that 45,000 colonists were not worth a war they could not win. On the 9th day, everything changed. It happened simultaneously across the entire NIGMA empire. Every communication device, military arrays, civilian broadcast systems, personal communicators, emergency channels, entertainment screens, even the small displays in children's learning centers activated at the same time. Every screen showed the same image. Every speaker carried the same voice. A human woman. She was not old, perhaps mid-30s, with short dark hair and a thin face. She wore no uniform, no armor, nothing that identified her rank or role. She could have been anyone. She looked directly into the camera with brown eyes that held no emotion at all. But it was not her appearance that stopped the heart of the NIGMA empire. It was where she was standing. She was in the Imperial throne room. Sheathrak's personal chamber, the most heavily guarded room on the most heavily guarded planet in the Empire. A room protected by 3 rings of orbital defense platforms, a planetary shield grid, 40,000 elite soldiers, and a security system that scanned every molecule within 500 meters. No one entered that room without the Overmind's direct permission. No one. And yet there she stood, alone, in the center of the room, broadcasting from the Overmind's own communication array. Across the Empire, NIGMA soldiers stopped moving. Officers froze at their stations. On 1,000 worlds, 1 billion citizens stared at their screens and tried to understand what they were seeing. The woman spoke. Her voice was quiet and clear. Overmind Sheathrak, peoples of the NIGMA Empire. My name is Captain Rena Stoll, Terran Confederate Special Operations. I am speaking to you from the heart of your capital. I am standing in your Emperor's throne room. I walked through every layer of your security to reach this place. She paused and let those words settle. I am alone. I am unarmed. And I am the last kind thing that humanity will ever send you. On the bridge of the crushing maw, still in orbit above Velshara, Keddies watched the broadcast with all 6 eyes wide open. His officers were silent. No one clicked their teeth. No one made a sound. This is your 3rd and final warning, Captain Stoll continued. You have 10 standard cycles. Release every surviving human colonist. Withdraw all military forces from the Velshara system. Surrender those responsible for the deaths of our citizens. She took 1 step closer to the camera. If you do not comply, there will be no 4th warning. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. What comes next has no name. It has no end. And when it is over, the galaxy will not mourn you because we have made sure they were watching. Her eyes did not blink. 10 cycles, choose wisely. The broadcast ended. Every screen in the NIGMA empire went dark at the same instant. On the homeworld, alarms erupted through the imperial palace. Shithrak roared orders from his private command center. 200 elite guards in full combat armor stormed the throne room, weapons drawn, scanning every corner. They found nothing. The room was empty. There was no sign that anyone had been there, no footprints, no DNA traces, no disruption to any security system. The logs showed that no door had opened. No window had been breached. No ship had been detected entering or leaving the atmosphere. Captain Rena Stoll had appeared in the most secure room in the Empire, delivered her message, and vanished as if she had never existed. Shithrak stood in the doorway of his own throne room and stared at the empty space where the human had stood. For the first time in his long life, something cold moved through his chest. It was not fear. Shithrak did not allow himself to feel fear, but it was something close, something that whispered a question he had never asked before. What am I actually facing? He crushed the feeling. He buried it under pride and rage and a lifetime of conquest. He was the overmind. He had broken civilizations. He would not be frightened by a single unarmed woman standing in a room. Within hours, the galaxy erupted. The conquered of civilized species called an emergency session, the largest in its history. Every member species sent representatives. The chamber was so full that delegations stood in the aisles and crowded the observation galleries. The conquered issued a formal galactic observation decree. What happened next in NIGMA space would be witnessed and recorded by every civilization in the Orion spiral. This was not for humanity's benefit or the NIGMA's. It was for history itself. Behind closed doors, desperate messages flooded into NIGMA diplomatic channels from across the galaxy. The Drenaki sent a single-line communication. Surrender now. You do not have time to understand why. Just do it. The Velthani sent a detailed analysis of human military capability, or at least what little they knew of it, with a handwritten note from their eldest diplomat. For the sake of your children, listen to us. Even species that feared and hated the NIGMA sent warnings. A civilization called the Orath, who had lost their homeworld to NIGMA conquest 2 centuries ago, sent a message that simply read, "We want you to suffer, but not like this. Nothing deserves what is coming." Shithrak read none of these messages. He had made his decision before the broadcast even ended. On the 5th day after the warning, he gathered every broadcast array in the Empire and transmitted his response. He stood on a platform above the main square of his capital city, surrounded by thousands of soldiers in gleaming armor, with the full might of the NIGMA military displayed behind him. He spoke with absolute conviction. "I give the humans their answer." Behind him, on the great screen of the Capitol Square, NIGMA soldiers brought forward the remaining human colonists from Velshara Roman 4. Men, women, and children. Thin, exhausted, frightened. They were forced to their knees in a row. The galaxy watched. The conquered watched. Billions of eyes across 1,000 worlds turned to their screens. Shithrak gave the order. The soldiers carried it out. Every human colonist was executed on live broadcast. The last to die was an elderly man who looked directly at the camera and said nothing. He just looked, as if he were memorizing the face of every person watching. Then he was gone. Shithrak turned back to the camera. "This is the answer of the NIGMA Empire. We do not bow, we do not bend, we do not break." The broadcast ended. And then something happened that frightened the galaxy more than the executions, more than the NIGMA fleet, more than anything in living memory. Humanity went silent. Every human embassy in the galaxy closed its doors on the same day. Every human merchant ship returned to port. Every human communication channel, diplomatic, military, commercial, personal, went dead. The Terran Confederacy, A civilization of 30 billion people spread across hundreds of worlds simply stopped talking. No threats, no declarations, no response to the executions, nothing. The silence was total and absolute. For 10 cycles, not a single human signal was detected anywhere in the galaxy. A conquered diplomat, an old Metheran who had served the Council for a century, stood at his office window and stared at the blank screen where human channels had once hummed with activity. His aide asked him what the silence meant. He did not turn from the window. His voice was barely a whisper. "It means they are done talking. It means they have nothing left to say. Every word that needed to be spoken has been spoken. Every chance that could be given has been given." He closed his eyes. "It means that whatever happens next, the humans will not explain it. They will not justify it. They will simply do it." He pressed his hand against the cold glass. "God's help the NIGMA. The humans have stopped talking." On the first hour after the 10th cycle ended, every star in the NIGMA empire seemed to blink. It was not the stars, of course. It was the sensor arrays. Across all 1,200 NIGMA-controlled systems, every deep space sensor, every orbital satellite, every communication relay, and every military scanning station died at the same moment, not one by one, not in waves, all of them everywhere at once. The technology that killed them was smaller than a grain of sand. Microdrones, billions of them, had been drifting through NIGMA space for years. They had arrived in the hulls of trade ships, in the dust clouds of asteroid fields, in the wake of commercial freighters that passed through NIGMA territory on routine routes. They had been sleeping, waiting, doing nothing at all. Until now. Each microdrone carried a charge no bigger than a spark. Alone, it was nothing. But when a billion of them activated simultaneously inside the circuitry of every NIGMA sensor and communication device in existence, the effect was absolute. The NIGMA empire went blind and deaf in a single heartbeat. On the NIGMA homeworld, Sheathrak's command center plunged into darkness. Screens went blank. Holographic displays flickered and died. Communication officers shouted into dead channels. Military coordinators tried to reach fleet commanders and received only static. Sheathrak stood in the center of the chaos and understood, for the first time, what was happening. "They were already inside," he said. His voice was quiet. No one heard him over the noise. "They were inside our systems before the first warning was ever given." He was right, but understanding it now changed nothing. Across the empire, NIGMA military commanders experienced the same moment of sudden blindness. Ships that had been in constant contact with each other were suddenly alone. Fleet formations that relied on coordinated sensor networks fell into confusion. Captains shouted orders to ships that could not hear them. And then the second phase began. Deep within the computer networks of every NIGMA warship, lines of code that had been dormant for years woke up. They had arrived through software updates, maintenance patches, and routine data transfers, the ordinary digital traffic of interstellar commerce. Humanity had been trading with the NIGMA for decades. Every trade agreement, every data exchange, every routine communication had carried invisible passengers. The code activated and went to work. Navigation systems received new coordinates that led to empty space, to the crushing gravity of gas giants, to the burning surfaces of stars. Weapons systems locked themselves in diagnostic mode and refused to respond. Shield generators began cycling randomly, flickering on and off like broken lights. Engine systems vented plasma in controlled bursts, not enough to destroy the ships, but enough to leave them drifting and helpless. The 2,000-ship armada that Sheathrak had sent to Velshara was the hardest hit. These were the finest warships in the Empire, crewed by the best officers, carrying the most advanced weapons. And in the span of 30 minutes, they became floating metal boxes. Warlord Kedis watched from the bridge of the crushing maw as his flagship systems failed one by one. First the long-range sensors, then the targeting computers, then the weapons, then the shields. His engineering teams worked frantically to regain control, ripping out infected systems, trying to restart hardware manually. Nothing worked. The human code was not just in the software. It had embedded itself in the hardware firmware, in the basic operating layers that controlled every function of the ship. Kedis stood in the middle of his dying bridge and felt something he had never felt in his entire career: helplessness. Then the humans arrived. They did not come from one direction, they came from everywhere. 4 full siege armadas of the Terran Confederate Navy emerged from hidden positions in dark space pockets, regions of empty space between star systems where no civilization had ever thought to look. Over 10,000 warships dropped into normal space in a coordinated wave that spanned the entire NIGMA empire. They had been in position for months, waiting, silent, patient, while Ambassador Vasquez delivered the first warning, while Admiral Morrow delivered the second, while Captain Stoll stood in the throne room and delivered the third. The real force had already been deployed. The warnings were not preparation for war. The war had been prepared long before the first word was spoken. The warnings were exactly what humanity said they were: a genuine chance to avoid what was already in place. Admiral Morrow commanded from the Requiem, now at the center of a fleet so vast that it filled the tactical display from edge to edge. He sat in his command chair and watched the battle unfold across 100 simultaneous feeds. It was not a battle, not really. A battle implies 2 sides fighting. This was something else. NIGMA ships, blind and crippled, tried to fight. Some captains managed to restore partial weapons through sheer determination, firing manually, aiming by visual observation through viewports. Morrow respected that courage. He did not underestimate it. But courage without coordination, without sensors, without functioning shields, was not enough. Human ships moved with a precision that the conquered observers would later describe as mechanical, almost inhuman. Every firing solution was calculated. Every target was selected based on maximum efficiency. There was no wasted fire. No ship fired twice at the same target. Formations shifted and adapted in real time, each vessel knowing exactly where every other vessel was and what it was doing. The NIGMA fleet at Velshara was dismantled in 4 hours. 2,000 ships reduced to drifting wreckage. Escape pods were not fired upon. Surrendering vessels were disabled but not destroyed. Ships that managed to power down their weapons completely were left alone. The pattern repeated across the empire. In system after system, NIGMA military installations were hit with surgical precision. Orbital defense platforms were taken apart piece by piece. Weapons factories were reduced to rubble. Military shipyards were turned to scrap, but civilian structures were untouched. Cities, hospitals, schools, agricultural centers, human targeting systems identified them, marked them, and avoided them completely. On the NIGMA homeworld, the orbital defense grid, 3 rings of massive battle stations that the NIGMA had spent 2 centuries building, the most powerful defensive network in their history, was destroyed in 11 minutes. Not breached, not damaged, destroyed. Every station, every platform, every weapon emplacement. 11 minutes. Human Marines landed on Velshara Roman for 6 hours after the operation began. They found the labor camps empty. The colonists were gone, executed on sheath racks ordered days before. The Marines stood in the empty barracks and found the personal belongings of the dead still arranged on their bunks. A child's drawing, a worn photograph, a small carved wooden bird that someone had made to pass the time. The Marine commander, a woman named Colonel Destat, picked up the wooden bird and held it for a long time. Then she put it carefully in her pocket and ordered her troops to continue. Aboard the Requiem, a young officer turned to Admiral Morrow after a major engagement and began to cheer. Others on the bridge started to join in. "Silence," Morrow said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise like a blade. The bridge went still. "There is nothing to celebrate here," he said. He did not look away from the tactical display. "People are dying. Some of them deserve it. Most of them do not. This is a consequence, not a victory. We will treat it as one." Nobody cheered again. The operation continued for 19 standard cycles. Across 1,200 systems, the NIGMA military machine was taken apart with the same cold, thorough efficiency. Every warship was accounted for. Every military base was cataloged and neutralized. Every weapon system was destroyed or disabled. Shithrak spent the final days in his underground bunker beneath the Imperial Palace. The palace above him shook with distant impacts as orbital strikes hit military targets across the continent. His guards stood around him in the dim emergency lighting, their weapons useless, their communications dead. On the last day, a sound came through the bunker's internal speakers. Someone had connected to the local broadcast system, the only system still functioning, because the humans had allowed it to function. A simple message played on repeat. It was in every NIGMA language, every dialect, every regional variation. The words were spoken by a human voice, calm and measured. "You were warned." Shithrak sat on the cold floor of his bunker, surrounded by the last remnants of his guard, and listened to those two words repeat over and over. Above him, his empire was being dismantled, not with rage, not with hatred, with precision, with patience, with the cold, unstoppable certainty of a promise being kept. He had asked the humans to come. They had come. He had told them to bring their strength. They had brought it. He had dared them to show him what consequences meant. They were showing him. The galaxy expected fire. It expected the NIGMA homeworld turned to glass, oceans boiled away, continents cracked open. Every species watching, and they were all watching, had seen what humanity could do over the past 19 cycles. They had watched 1,200 star systems brought to their knees with a precision that made even the oldest civilizations feel small. They had seen what happened when humanity stopped talking and started acting. So when the guns went silent, nobody understood. The NIGMA homeworld was still there. Its cities stood. Its people were alive. The skis were scarred with the trails of orbital strikes, but those strikes had hit only military targets, barracks, weapons depots, command centers, and the defense grid. The great capital city, home to 60 million NIGMA civilians, was untouched. Not a single civilian structure had been hit. Not one. Across the former empire, the same pattern held. Military assets were gone, warships were wreckage, weapons factories were craters, but hospitals still stood. Farms still grew food, schools still held children. And then the human ships did something that shocked the galaxy even more than the war itself. Medical vessels arrived, hundreds of them. Large, white-hulled ships marked with the symbol of the Terran Confederate Medical Corps, a simple blue circle with a human hand reaching outward. They entered NIGMA space without weapons, without escorts, broadcasting their intentions on open channels. They brought doctors, surgeons, nurses, and medical supplies. They set up field hospitals on worlds that had been damaged in the fighting. They treated wounded NIGMA soldiers alongside wounded civilians. They operated on children who had been hurt by falling debris. They gave blood to species whose biology was nothing like their own, using synthetic compounds they had developed specifically for this purpose. The NIGMA civilians did not know what to do. Many ran from the human doctors at first. They had been told their entire lives that other species were either subjects or enemies. The idea that the same species that had just destroyed their military would now heal their wounded did not fit inside their understanding of the universe. But the humans did not stop. They did not demand gratitude. They did not ask for anything in return. They simply worked day after day in quiet, steady effort. On the liberated worlds, the 38 species that had been conquered and enslaved by the NIGMA over centuries, the reaction was different. When human ships arrived and announced that the NIGMA occupation was over, some populations did not believe it at first. They had been slaves for so long that freedom was an idea they had stopped imagining. Human aid workers moved in alongside the medical teams. They brought food, building materials, communication equipment, and something far more valuable: recognition. Each liberated species was given a seat at a newly formed Reconstruction Council. Their voices, silenced for generations, were heard again. A Velthani diplomat who witnessed the liberation of the Oreth homeworld wrote in her personal journal, "I watched a human soldier kneel in the dirt beside an Oreth elder who had spent 80 years in chains. The soldier cut the chains with a small tool, gently, carefully, as if the elder were made of glass. The elder looked at his free hands and began to weep. The soldier sat beside him and said nothing. Sometimes there are no words. Sometimes presence is enough." Overmind Sheathrak was captured alive on the 42nd day after the operation began. Human special forces found him in a deep bunker beneath the mountains north of the capital. He was alone. His guards had surrendered days earlier. He had refused to leave. When the soldiers entered the bunker, they found him sitting on the floor in the dark. He did not fight. He did not speak. He looked at the humans with his 6 eyes and saw something in their faces that he had never seen directed at him before: not hatred, not triumph, not even anger. Just a kind of tired sadness, the look of people who had done something terrible because it was necessary and wished it had not been. They brought him out into the daylight and transported him to a secure facility. He was given food, water, medical attention, and a clean room. He was not beaten. He was not humiliated. He was treated like a prisoner of consequence, not a trophy. His trial was held before a Terran Confederate tribunal and broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. The charges were specific: the murder of the human colonists on Velshara Roman 4, the execution of prisoners on live broadcast, the deliberate killing of civilians under his authority. The evidence was presented clearly and without emotion. Witnesses testified. Records were shown. The facts spoke for themselves. Sheathrak was given the right to speak in his own defense. He stood before the tribunal smaller now than he had seemed on his throne, his armor stripped away, his body thin from weeks of captivity, and looked at the human judges. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every decision, every order. I am NIGMA. I do not apologize to pray." The lead judge, a woman with silver hair and steady eyes, looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "We know. That is why your empire no longer exists." He was sentenced to life imprisonment in a remote facility, humane, secure, and far from the worlds he had once ruled. He would live out his days in a small room with a window that looked out on a garden. It was not cruelty. It was not kindness. It was simply the measured consequence of his choices, no more and no less. Ambassador Yelin Vasquez returned to the conquered of civilized species 6 months after the conflict ended. The great chamber was full. Every species was present. Thousands of diplomats, leaders, and observers packed the galleries. The room was so quiet that the sound of her footsteps echoed as she walked to the speaker's platform. She looked the same as she had on the day she delivered the first warning. Small, dark-haired, calm. She carried no notes. She spoke from memory. "The Terran Confederacy takes no pleasure in what was done. We extended our hand and it was refused. We drew a line and it was crossed. We gave a final chance and it was answered with the blood of our people." Her voice was steady, but there was weight behind every word. Every step was measured. Every warning was clear. The NIGMA Empire chose destruction and we delivered it, but only the destruction they chose. Their people live. Their children grow. Their culture survives. We did not erase them from history. We removed their ability to harm others, and that ability will not return. She paused and looked across the chamber, meeting the eyes of species who feared humanity, species who admired humanity, and species who did not know what to feel. Let this stand as a reminder to this conquered and to every civilization watching. Humanity does not seek war. We do not hunger for conquest. We do not dream of empire, but we protect our own, always, without exception. She took a breath. And we keep our promises, every single one. She stepped down from the platform. The chamber was silent for a very long time. 200 years later, a conquered historian named Seelith Vane completed the definitive record of what the galaxy now called the NIGMA collapse. It had taken him 30 years to write. He had interviewed survivors, studied military records, visited the former NIGMA homeworld, and walked through the memorial built on Velshara Roman 4, where the names of every human colonist were carved into black stone. The NIGMA people still existed. They had rebuilt themselves as a peaceful federation of worlds, governed by elected councils instead of an overmind. Their military was small, defensive, and operated under strict conquered oversight. Many NIGMA citizens looked back at the empire with shame. Some still looked back with pride. Humanity did not interfere with either feeling. They simply watched as they always did and waited as they always had. The 38 species freed from NIGMA rule had thrived. Several had become major civilizations in their own right. The Aurath, once enslaved for 2 centuries, had produced some of the finest artists and scientists in the galaxy. They maintained a quiet, respectful relationship with humanity. Every year on the anniversary of their liberation, they sent a single message to Earth: "We remember." Seelith Vane sat in his study on the last night of his work and wrote the final entry. His old hands moved carefully over the pages. He had spent a lifetime studying civilizations, their rises and their falls. He had seen patterns repeat across thousands of years and thousands of species. But the lesson of the NIGMA collapse was different. It was simpler than all the others. He wrote, "In the long history of the Orion Spiral, many empires have risen on strength and fallen to stronger forces. This is the ordinary rhythm of civilization. But the lesson of the NIGMA collapse is not about strength. It is not about weapons or fleets or the cold mathematics of war. It is about listening." The humans told them what would happen. They told them plainly, clearly, without deception and without exaggeration. They said, "Release our people and there will be peace. Harm our people and there will be consequences." They gave this message 3 times, each time with patience, each time with sincerity. The NIGMA did not listen. They could not believe that a species so calm, so measured, so willing to talk could be capable of what followed. They mistook patience for weakness. They mistook mercy for fear. They mistook silence for surrender. They were wrong, and they paid for it with everything they had. The galaxy learned. In the 2 centuries since the collapse, no species has reached the 3rd warning. Most do not risk even the 1st. The humans did not change. They never needed to. They had been telling the truth the entire time. He set down his pen and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, the humans were still doing what they had always done: building, trading, raising families, exploring the endless dark. Quiet, patient, honest. And very, very serious about their promises.